Welcome back to the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. I'm Olivia, and this is Aaron, a serf who works on my farm.
Watch out, I've got a bill hook, and I'm not afraid to use it.
Fuck, I shouldn't have raised his taxes. The extra tuppence a year wasn't worth it.
Now give me back all my groats.
No. Who are you calling groats?
And I'm gonna burn all your manuscripts.
You're groats.
Aww. Can I just say, it was very mature of you not to go for a peasants are revolting joke right up top.
That's right. I'm not like other manorial lords. I'm a responsible, ethical manorial lord. And this week on the Weird Medieval Guys podcast, we are going to be talking about steps that responsible and ethical manorial lords can take to ensure that their financial endeavors deliver stable and consistent returns on investment for their families for generations to come by killing your peasants.
Yes, or in other words, how do you make sure that all of your tenants don't come and burn down your house?
Exactly. And what should you do if they do that? Kill them.
Kill them before they petition the king to kill you.
No, I didn't know they could do that.
They can't. Mostly.
Oh, thank God.
The feast is o'er. Now brimming wine in lordly cup is seen to shine before each eager guest. And silence fills the crowded hall, as deep as when the herald's call thrills in the loyal breast.
And we're going to be talking about, first of all, what do we mean when we talk about a peasant's revolt? Because it is a term that gets thrown around quite a lot. Then we're going to talk about why would peasants revolt? How would they revolt? What are the consequences of them revolting? Mostly they just get killed. And then what the kind of cultural legacy of those revolts is, both in the Middle Ages and till now.
Yeah, because you hear, certainly about, especially I think in the late and high Middle Ages, these instances of peasants just getting really pissed off. Sort of the image of the pitchfork-bearing mob just rocking up outside their lord's house with, a bone to pick. What actually are we talking about, though, in the sort of, more formal sense when we say peasants revolting in the Middle Ages?
Yeah, so, first of all, I think the first part that we have to break down is the word peasants, because I did not know this until researching this episode. Peasant is not a word that enters the English language until the 15th century.
Whoa.
So you would not have been calling them, in the famous, Peasants' Revolt of 1381, which was never called that at the time, they wouldn't have been called themselves peasants. Mm-hmm. It was the Great Rising, or, the Revolt of 1381 in England. But the category of peasant, which is basically just means kind of anybody who's involved with agriculture.
Yeah, literally it comes from, the word for countryside, doesn't it? I think.
The country folk.
So it's a guy who lives in the fields or in the countryside. Is a farmer, basically. A man of the soil.
And also definitionally not a nobleman as well.
Exactly.
So a working man or woman who doesn't live in the city.
Yeah. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty.
Yeah.
You've milked a cow.
Oh, yes. Who hasn't?
Probably loads of times.
Probably done more disturbing things to cows.
Exactly.
Checked for fertility. Little joke for the farmers in the audience. Wait. But the thing is that category of people who live in the countryside and are not the landowning aristocracy includes most people in pretty much all societies in the Middle Ages, and a huge amount. We have the sort of the Monty Python-esque image of the peasants and the peasantry. But, this could be, you could be quite a wealthy, successful peasant. You could be living quite comfortably.
Yeah, I think that peasant gets often conflated with the word serf, which really does sort of convey, the most miserable existence possible of being tied to the land and owning nothing. But yeah, there were peasants who could be, artisans could be peasants. Your local smith, he was a peasant. There were peasants who owned land. Because that's the yeoman is someone who owns land. Not someone who owns a lot of land, and not someone who owns enough land that they necessarily are represented in Parliament in England when that becomes a thing, or, that they are entitled, that they have a title, that is, but it certainly could be someone with a fair amount of money and freedom.
But yeah, so there's even among the people who kind of live are agricultural workers who live off the land, there's a huge variation in, how wealthy you would be and how comfortable you would be, which is how big is your farm and how good is your soil.
How fertile are your crops?
Exactly. And, not only is this, an economic thing, but also, lots of local government positions would be filled by wealthy peasants. So, I have a list here from an article.
Because the whole point of being an aristocrat is that you don't have to work.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So we need someone to be like the librarian.
Yeah. Well,
That's
you need
not
somebody
gonna
to
be
be
an
the
aristocrat.
reeve.
Yes.
You need somebody to be the Hayward. I actually don't know what that is. The constable.
What does the constable do?
It keeps the peace.
Okay. What about the reeve?
Church warden collects the taxes.
Okay.
Church warden,
Damn,
bailiff, and jurors, of course.
Rural
the rural jurors.
Rural jurers.
Well, you need rural jurors.
Yeah, no,
if you're
going
to keep the king's peace.
The rural juror was often a peasant.
Yeah, well, you joke, but it's true.
No, exactly.
And again, it would have to be, because that's who most of the people are.
Yeah.
Cities are not big. Most people live in the countryside, and most people are not nobles.
Yes, exactly. And when we talk about peasant uprisings as well, I think it's important to also mention that not all of these people even were necessarily rural, by the way. There were quite a lot of urbanites involved, both poor urbanites and more middle-class urbanites. And what we find, actually, is that it is more people who are more towards this sort of burgeoning middle-class end of the peasantry spectrum who are being involved in these revolts. So it's actually not a lot of serfs and people who are tied to the land. So that will also be something that comes up quite a bit later on. But the bottom line is, or the thing that really, I think, unites most of these people anyways, especially in England, because we'll get into the big one in England in 1381 that happened, is that none of these people were represented in Parliament. Mm-hmm. And in general, all of these people, regardless of when and where these rebellions took place, were being excluded from the lawmaking process. No one was asking the local reeve, well, how much do you think we should raise the taxes by? They were just saying, go collect the taxes. And then when you collected the taxes, you'd be out the door and they'd be like, the reeve has to pay the taxes too. And you'd be like, crap, I always hope they forget about that. So it was, these were still not people who were empowered politically, even if they were somewhat empowered financially compared to the people further down the line.
Taxation without representation.
Fuck! Braveheart? My wife?
My wife. They may take our lives, but they will never take our groats.
My name is John. John O'Groats.
Nice.
I'm moving up north, so I don't have to pay my taxes.
And a lot of we'll get into some of the central protagonists in some of these revolts. A lot of them are quite mysterious in their background. But the ones we do know about, the leaders tend to be people who are right at the upper end of what you might consider to be the sort of the ordinary common folk. I mean, we will talk about one guy who literally is a former MP who ends up leading a revolt. So, again, you might say, if you're a student of revolutionary history of the 19th, 20th centuries, you would say, oh, interesting, so the sort of the educated and sort of upwardly mobile class are the sort of the forementers of revolution. Well, that never happened. That will never happen again.
Never in danger, quailed our fathers, free and undaunted.
So that's the general overview of who is peasants and what peasants are involved in revolts. Let's talk about the actual process of a revolt.
Yes, so Peter Blicke, who is a German academic and wrote specifically about German and Holy Roman Empire peasant revolts in the late medieval and early modern period, describes these 5 sort of general stages as either how this happens or maybe as a how-to guide for staging your own peasant revolt. But basically, he explains that starts with some sort of complaint you have to your ruler as a peasant. Often this has to do with taxes. We'll get more into reasons why you might have these complaints later on, and this could culminate if your ruler refused to cooperate or listen to your complaints, with you as a peasant refusing to perform your oath of submission, or your oath of loyalty, or to refuse to pay your taxes, refuse to pay your rent, or in some other way to violate the contract that was set out between you and your lord. So, of course, you don't hear about the many times that peasants complained to their lords and their lords listened, or some other sort of arrangement was reached. Of course, there were plenty of times when this did happen, and I think we talked in our cathedrals episode a little bit about sort of urbanization and how that actually kind of eroded some certain people's rights compared to the traditional sort of agricultural class, because you and all of your agricultural mates did have a bit of bargaining power when it came to trying to talk to your lord. So if you got, oftentimes there were, discussions or complaints or arguments or fights that never actually reached this stage 2 of the critical breakdown between, the oath between a peasant and their lord. And then he talks about a third stage after that, in which the matter might be brought before a legal arbitrator. So it didn't always escalate directly to violence. And this is also where we see why some of these peasants might be more from sort of well-to-do or even slightly educated classes of society, because they might have to go before the law and put their complaints in general terms, explain why they felt like they were being treated unfairly. And again, there were legal processes for how to do this. Again, as a peasant, you were more disadvantaged, which was why this often escalated into, or sometimes the step was completely bypassed, violence. So peasants would arm themselves in, military, or he says paramilitary fashion, which basically just means grabbing anything that's either heavy, pointy, or both, and getting all your mates together, and you're pissed off, and you're gonna go try to knock some aristocratic heads together. That's basically it. And this, he says, inevitably, and we will see that it was indeed pretty inevitable, led to the 5th stage, military defeat and compromise.
Yeah, I mean, when you're in the... I do want to kind of pick up on one point, which is that, when you're in the 4th stage, what do you think... What is your kind of, theory of change? What are you trying to actually affect here? And a lot of the time the answer is, you show up in a big scary mob, and you hope that the guy backs down. Or in a lot of cases, the answer is arson.
Yes.
You go to wherever the records are stored, and then either burn it down or get the guys to burn it for you. So, for example, during the 1381 Great Rising, rebels besieged St. Albans Abbey in Hertfordshire, and basically their demand was that they were going to just get all the records out of the abbey, and then burn them in the town square. Now, luckily, what they didn't know is a previous abbot had asked all of the records to be duplicated, so it didn't achieve anything. But why were you doing this? The answer is essentially to disrupt the functioning of the local kind of... essentially what passes for the local government, which is the records, whether they're kept in the manor or the abbey, whoever often it was, the center of or home of the landlord. If you burn all those records, those are the records that keep track of who owns what legal disputes have been settled, and how. It is essentially the same as launching a cyber attack on your local council to make a point.
Yeah, exactly.
It's now they can't send Outlook emails anymore.
Not only who owns what, but who owes what as well.
Exactly.
What taxes? Well, it's like a real, if the teacher doesn't show up to the exam, everyone gets an A. If somehow the records that say how much taxes I owe get thrown in the fire, then maybe I just don't owe any taxes. Or it's like when they try to scan something at the supermarket.
You try telling the IRS that every year.
Yeah, exactly. Please, how many more data centers do I have to firebomb? No, it's like when you're at the supermarket and your thing doesn't scan. So you say, does that mean it's free? And the cashier always says, that's funny. It actually does mean it's free. It's true. I'm a cashier. Try it sometime. They'll love it.
I wanted to just quickly mention one other tactic, which is just kill your local civil servant. The William Wallace technique. There's a great anecdote. And by the way, I got a lot of this from the something called the People of 1381 Project, which is a brilliant kind of historical project to compile all of the people and basically create a data set of everybody who we know was involved in the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. It's a great resource. They have a website. Go check it out. There's one story of a woman called Catherine Garman in Suffolk who essentially shoved the local chief justice, onto a boat and just pushed it out into the river without any oars or anything. And the chief justice couldn't escape and presumably couldn't swim very well because he drowned.
No!
But anyway, back to...
Amazing.
Back to military defeat and compromise.
That's basically it. So yeah, spoiler alert, sorry if you're a peasant fan, but they don't often really succeed in what exactly? And we'll get into that a bit more, but often that was how these and revolts ended, was with them, the peasants being violently suppressed by the lords, and either a compromise being reached between the lords and the peasants, or things basically returning to how they were before.
So that's a general overview of how a peasant uprising can happen. But I think we should zero in on, why would you do this, given that the success rate is very low?
Just hate my lord.
I mean, the answer usually is taxes, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's other stuff, but it's mostly taxes. So one of the things that's interesting about the history of popular revolts in the Middle Ages is that there are a huge number more of them from the end of the 13th century onwards. And the reason for that, I think most people agree, is an economic one. So at the end of the 13th century, we were already in a weird position where agricultural production is lagging behind population growth, which is always going to slowly drag food prices up. And, of course, also land shortages can become an issue. And this is all before, in the mid-14th century, when you have a little thing called the Black Death, which kills half of everybody, more or less. Now, the Black Death does a couple of interesting things for the economy. Putting aside, it feels gross to talk purely about the Black Death as an economic thing, but we do need to talk about it. So one of the things that happens because you have a gigantic contraction of the population, as in, again, half to a third of all people die horribly within the space of a couple of years, is that you have a massive contraction of the economy. Obviously, because A, lots of people are dead, and B, the people who are left are traveling around less, and are less interested in selling stuff to people far away. Degrowth. Yep, truly. In it. The most successful degrowth in history. But as the population recovers, what's very interesting is that you have massive labor shortages, because again, there's all this suddenly freed up arable land and a very hungry population, but not as many peasants as there used to be. And so what you see from the mid 13th century onwards is wages start ticking upwards. Now you might think, this is a brilliant opportunity for the peasants. Why would this lead them to revolt?
This sounds great. There's way less people because of something horrible, and everyone's making more money. It's just like Weimar Germany.
Well, yeah. Exactly. So first thing is that significant wage inflation is not inherently a good thing. So write that down.
Wow, I'm making so much money, and so is my neighbor. Oh no! The butcher raised his prices.
Well, exactly. This is the other issue, is that if the amount of money in a system goes up, but the amount of stuff in that system doesn't go up, then things just get more expensive. And of course, the other thing is that governments across Europe don't like this, Because inflation. Nobody likes inflation. Inflation is bad for incumbents, as any political science.
Well, there's some guys on Twitter who like inflation.
Only if it's Sonic.
Yeah, true.
So in England, for example, the English crown introduces two laws in 1349 and 1351 that basically cap wages at more or less pre-Black Death levels. And this pisses pretty much everybody off, because now we don't even get the benefit of getting more money for our labor. So we've just had the most traumatic thing that could possibly happen to any society, which is, again, a bunch of people essentially get raptured. And then also the government says that is lowering the minimum wage. Actually, no, the government has introduced the maximum wage.
No, not the maximum wage.
So, yeah, in those conditions, if you had a bad harvest, why wouldn't... And then add to that, this is all happening in the context of England in particular, and France in particular, being at war with each other, and having had been at war with each other for decades now.
God, that just would suck so badly to be alive then.
It's... Okay, we gotta take a quick detour to talk about that. I think it might be the worst time to be alive. Like, the immediate sort of Black Death and post-Black Death years, and also the 100 Years' War is happening.
1370?
Yeah.
1375?
1340 to 1370, I feel like. In France in particular, just horrendous. Mm-hmm. It would be basically like living in Mordor. And well, the other thing about wars is not only do wars kill people, and here I'm going to have to also, like, reduce something horrible to, like, raw numbers and economics, but wars are expensive. And if you're the king and you want to fund your wars, especially because your wars are now being fought increasingly by professional soldiers who get paid wages instead of, like, guys doing their feudal obligation to ride a horse around and stab folks, you need to pay those people, and to pay for that, you need to raise taxes. So you are stuck in this sort of slightly self-imposed stagflationary economy.
God.
Where you're spending all this money to get people sent off to France to die, and also everybody's broke.
Nice. Sounds like a dream.
Well, exactly. Like, in the democratic world, that would be a recipe for, hey, this is the big button mark, don't do this. Because you're going to lose the election. But, of course, if there's no election, and the population, like, don't really have an... I mean, why do... I mean, even, like, just speaking more generally, why do you get kind of popular revolts in any political system? It's because there's not a mechanism to resolve the tensions and resolve the conflicts in a non-violent or non-confrontational way. You know, why do rebellions and revolutions happen? Well, because people can't affect political change through the formal political institutions. Why do major industrial disputes, major strikes happen, like especially illegal strikes? Because the formal mechanisms for, like, resolving pay disputes aren't sufficient. Same shit, different day.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically, in summary, there's always going to be a tension when you try and raise taxes on people without that being put through a kind of democratic mechanism like an elected parliament with full suffrage. So there's always going to be a risk of your peasants not complying. But also, when economy very, very, very bad, and also lots of people are dead, maybe people are less tolerant of this stuff.
Yeah, and especially might feel like they have much less to lose, you know?
Well, yeah, because they're... like, half their family just died, from their perspective, for no reason.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you rebel?
Oh my gosh, I know.
Living in death, the man who's gone to yield. Never in danger, quailed our fathers, free and undone.
I mean, it's an interesting question. Why wouldn't you rebel? Because it's a question that, like, medieval political thought is also grappling with. Like, arguably, I would say the most sort of influential and important sort of medieval political thinker, Thomas Aquinas, has things to say about this. Because he has a whole section where he writes about sedition, which is for him is the catch-all term for, like, any kind of rebellion against your legal ruler. So Thomas Aquinas says, sedition is a special sin, having something in common with war and strife, and differing somewhat from them. It has something in common with them in so far as it implies a certain antagonism. But he does sort of interrogate whether sedition is always a sin, because he says, it would seem that sedition is not always a mortal sin, for sedition denotes a tumult tending to fight. But fighting is not always a mortal sin. Indeed, it is sometimes just and lawful. Furthermore, it is praiseworthy to deliver a multitude from a tyrannical rule. Yet this cannot easily be done without some dissension in the multitude if one part of the multitude seeks to retain the tyrant while the rest strive to dethrone him. In other words, sedition is okay if you want to remove a tyrant. Now, tyrant is not a term that is very easy to define. And he also sets the bar for when is it okay to remove a tyrant quite high. So he says, if there be not an excess of tyranny, it is more expedient to tolerate for a while the milder tyranny than, by acting against the tyrant, to be involved in many perils which are more grievous than the tyranny itself. Again, basically, rebelling against the tyrant is more dangerous than actually trying to remove him.
Yeah, and of course, this fits in quite well with the sort of morals and aesthetics of medieval Christianity, which actually would have you think that, suffering is pretty good. And really, there's, when in doubt, in medieval Catholicism, when in doubt, suffer.
Yeah.
Right? Because
it's all going to pay off.
Exactly. And anything you can do to kind of transcend this life and to, bear your sort of mortal and your mortal grievances and struggles is, it's all going to pay off. So, of course, there is this template of the Christian holy war and of, good deeds and good acts and helping other people. But, it's in order to really justify widespread violence in a medieval Catholic moral framework, it's going to be a pretty high bar to clear.
Yeah. To be fair to Aquinas, I think he lands in a very similar place to a lot of political thinkers for centuries after him, which is that you are kind of uncorking Pandora's box when you try to dethrone an authoritarian ruler or, an unjust ruler, because what comes after him could be worse.
As he says, some people might support the person that you perceive to be a tyrant, and so you are also fighting not just against the tyrant, but against the multitudes who you think that you are helping ultimately. So, yeah.
It's fascinating. It's almost like he's really smart.
I feel like Aquinas might have been kind of a smart guy.
I mean, yeah, he's like cribbing from like Augustine and stuff, but like he is setting the template for a lot of political science for hundreds of years. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and this is also like going to be the party line on war for, a lot of theologians and philosophers in the Middle Ages, all the way up to Luther. I mean, because Luther writes about, what's this tract about soldiers called? It's like, can a soldier be goated or whatever?
Don't look it up. I'd much prefer that.
And basically that's what he sort of arrives at, is that you can fight, basically you can fight in self-defense. So that's what he talks about, is like self-defense. And if something is provoked, then, you are if you're being provoked, then you are being, justified in fighting back against it. But yeah, you should never instigate, certainly.
But what's interesting, the other thing that's interesting about Aquinas' argument is that he's saying that, it's okay sedition is fine if you're trying to remove a tyrant. What's interesting about that in the context of the peasant revolts is that they are almost never about explicitly trying to remove a ruler. Sometimes it might be removing a royal official. In fact, it's quite often about removing a royal official, but they're never like, or almost never like, and now we're going to go kill the king.
Oh, no, that's one thing that we basically never see.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the kind of, and we're going to get into when we talk about, like, 1381 and other peasants' revolts, you'd see a lot of, like, what in Russia they would call, you know, the good Tsar and his evil ministers syndrome, which is like, oh, well, of course, you know, if only the Tsar knew. Actually, I think in Germany, under the Nazis, it was known as if only the Führer knew.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, well, obviously, you know, my local governor is a shit. If Hitler knew that the guy he appointed was bad, he would definitely fire him.
No, and I mean, and that's so, yeah, exactly. And that's so important. I mean, that is what, yeah, like Aquinas is talking about here. And this is what people are essentially always rebelling against in these peasant revolts. When they are rebelling, it's the middleman. It's never, it's basically never the king. You know, I can't think off the top of my head, although I'm sure there probably is one. But, you know, in, like, especially the areas where we're going to focus on, where these widespread peasant revolts happened, so England, France, Holy Roman Empire, I cannot think of that many times where peasants were trying to rise up and directly overthrow the king. There were lots of times when the nobles were trying to overthrow the king, but these revolts that we were talking about here were much, much more focused at sort of the petty tyranny of the local bureaucracy.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons for that is just, like, the medieval state is not very big, and it's not very far-reaching, and so the irritations that you would have, you probably wouldn't have that much, unless you were trying to, like, unless you were mad about a war happening, you probably wouldn't have many objections to the king most of the time.
Well, yeah, and we talked about, and, you know, the king is not the guy who's knocking on your door asking for money either. And, you know, we talked about this, again, a little bit, I think, in the cathedral episode. You made a really good point that, like, a lot of peasant... You made a really good point once.
It only took 60 episodes.
Several episodes ago, you made your first... No, just kidding. The point that actually a lot of these rebellions were sort of ideologically conservative because they were trying to keep things the same way that they were before.
Yeah.
And so this is not really something you could associate with, say, regime change.
No.
Or an actual fundamental change in the overarching structure that governs society. It was just like, I hate this bailiff. Should we all take turns stomping on his head?
And this is why...
Here's your taxes, asshole. Kick.
And this is why I think that, not to get ahead of ourselves, but I think that, like, revolutionary socialists have such a hard time trying to figure out what to make of medieval peasant revolts. Because the impulse is to go, oh, well, obviously this is based because it was trying to, like, you know, fight back against the oppressive class system. But also, like, it's not how anyone was thinking about it at all.
No.
So, Olivia, you laid out a pretty coherent sort of model of the process by which you might get a peasants' revolt, and we still need to kind of, I think, contextualize how often you would go through all of the steps in this cycle, which is not very often. So usually these kinds of issues would be resolved before anybody sort of started pointing sharp farming equipment at each other, and so there weren't really that many riots. I mean, it's very hard to track because they were much less recorded than major revolts because they weren't really worth commenting on that much. But even rarer were any kind of large-scale, like, mass popular uprisings, for the very simple reason that it's very, very hard to organize something like that in a country where information travels very slowly.
Yup. And it's really difficult to sustain this kind of momentum in any kind of popular movement, especially one that begins in this spur-of-the-moment fashion, and we've seen that time and time again in the 21st and 20th centuries as well, let alone, as you say, the Middle Ages, when information traveled very slowly. And so it was, you know, extremely difficult for these movements to sustain themselves without any kinds of tactics. Things like rations and pay and all of the things that are required to keep a massive group of people together and motivated and oriented towards the same goal are actually very, very different, very, very difficult to just procure at the spur of the moment. And the problems that this introduces are not helped by the fact that when it comes down to the actual fighting, you also probably have very little to no idea what's going on, very little plan, very little ability to basically maintain any kind of rank or order. When push comes to shove, people would often panic and run away, and this could be a bit of a positive tactic in some cases, because you could just all disperse and reconvene later. But it also is not the best strategy when it comes to maintaining sort of a well-formed and unified army. And so what we saw when it came down to the actual fighting was that usually the numbers of combatants were massively skewed in the favor of the peasants, and the number of casualties were massively skewed against the peasants, as in far, far more peasants died than the aristocrats who they were fighting. So one extreme example was the sort of German peasant rebellions in 1524 and 1525, where it's estimated that about 300,000 peasants rallied together. The rebellion was put down by about somewhere between probably 6,000 and 9,000 armed aristocrats. We think that maybe as many as 100,000 peasants died in the fights that took place, and the number of aristocrats that died was probably less than 100. Maybe a few dozen. Maybe even not that many.
I mean, it's actually like another question that I came across a lot when I was researching this episode was how many of these peasant rebels are former soldiers? The answer is basically, we don't know. Mm-hmm. But it certainly wasn't enough for it to give any kind of, like, momentum and, like, organization. This Seven Samurai, this was not.
No. No, and, you know, having one former soldier, or a few former soldiers in your midst is still, like, might help a bit, but it's not going to do a lot when it comes to getting a bunch of farmers with rakes and shovels to stand in a straight line and charge a guy on a horse wearing armor, and the horse is also wearing armor, and his sword costs more than your house.
So that's a kind of overview of peasant revolts in general, how they happened, why they happened, and how they went for everyone involved. Brackets, bad. But I think we need to let's get specific. Let's talk about some specific revolts. And there is only one place to start, and that is the 1381 Peasants' Revolt in England. Again, anachronistic name, usually would be called the Great Rising back then. Aside from the sheer scale of the thing, this is arguably like your prototypical peasant revolt. I feel like it all kind of fits the textbook definition. So it starts in 1381.
Oh, it's iconic, yeah.
It starts in 1381 when King Richard II attempts to impose a poll tax of 4 pence on every single royal subject to fund the war in France. And unsurprisingly, nobody likes this. And things kick off in Essex in May of 1381, where a royal official starts trying to impose that tax, and in response, just about everybody in Essex decides, no, actually, fuck this guy.
It was Brentwood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. The sexy part of Essex, as a woman at the pub quiz described South Essex to me.
Oh yeah, shout out to everybody who was at the pub quiz.
Yes, you guys are so fucking iconic. You guys are so iconic.
Yeah. Pub quizzes, yes. As it will be when this comes out.
Yep.
And so, unsurprisingly, the rebellion spreads to Kent, where an armed mob of several thousand men starts marching towards the capital of London. And at the same time, similar sort of less famous revolts start kicking off across the kingdom. So in Suffolk, in Somerset, in Lincolnshire, in Yorkshire, and probably in a bunch of other places that are not as well recorded. Because the recording of all of this is quite uneven. A, because it's the Middle Ages, and B, because one of the things that they were trying to do was destroy all the records.
And they did have some success, because didn't they just walk into Canterbury, and everyone in Canterbury was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, I'm not dealing with this.
But I think they went into Canterbury. I think they got some guys out, and they killed them. And then I think they were like, well, let's roll on to London. So yeah, their goal was not just, like, hold Canterbury.
Yeah, no. The goal was...
The People's Republic of Canterbury. You are now entering free Canterbury. Oh, God, please.
The CAZ, Canterbury Autonomous Zone.
Yes, the Kent Demilitarized Strip.
And so, what we end up with is, by summer 1381, is this mass of several thousand peasants from the southeast of England marching towards London with a couple of goals in mind. Number one, reverse the poll tax. Number two, repeal these sort of labor laws that I mentioned earlier that were capping workers' wages. And number three, to get the king to remove his royal officials who they blamed for all of this sort of malfeasance. Like, oh, again, it's good czar or bad ministers. Classic. And the two kind of most famous ringleaders of the revolt are, number one, Wat Tyler, a guy we know nothing about.
He probably was a Tyler.
No, his name probably wasn't Tyler. That's another thing.
Oh, really? I thought it said that he was a Tyler.
It's all contested. Nobody knows anything about this guy.
What's next?
We don't even know what
Jack
meant.
Straw wasn't made out of straw.
And the other guy who we know a little bit more about is John Ball. Now, John Ball was an itinerant preacher who, in the previous kind of few years, had been causing trouble for the clergy in various counties of southern England by preaching, just generally unhelpful things like, equality and things of that nature. And he gives a very, very famous speech to the rebels on the outskirts of London that has been immortalized and probably... at the very least, it's been almost certainly added to over the years, if not completely invented. But I do have to read it because it's important. And the famous speech is, "When Adam delved and Eve spun, who then was the gentleman? From the beginning all men by nature were created alike, and our bondage or servitude came in by the unjust oppression of naughty men. For if God would have had any bondsman from the beginning, he would have appointed who would have had any bond and who free. And therefore I exhort you to consider that now the time is come, appointed to us by God, in which ye may, if ye will, cast off the yoke of bondage and recover liberty."
Woo!
Yeah. Woo!
And that first line, when Adam delved and Eve span, so when Adam, worked the land and Eve spun her wool in the Garden of Eden, basically, who was then the gentleman, is quite potent because it's harkening back to a sort of, more primitive time in the theoretical human existence when there weren't these social bonds or social hierarchies, and it's recognizing them as a construct of the contemporary worlds.
Yes.
And it echoes forth through history. I just saw it on a massive fuck-off banner in the William Morris Gallery.
Oh, William Morris was all about John Ball and things of that nature. But what I think is interesting about that is, if you compare it to, modern revolutionary movements, which are very much future-focused, this is a justification of rebellion that is based in, from a Christian medieval point of view, the literal oldest thing that's ever happened. He wants to return.
We need to return to existence itself.
Yes, absolutely. So it is a kind of utopianism, but it's a utopianism that is deeply, deeply, deeply Christian and deeply biblical. And this is one of the reasons, I think, why John Ball... Because for hundreds of years after his death, John Ball was kind of castigated as this is the classic agitator archetype. But he has been reclaimed by basically every single generation of English radicals. Because, to be fair, when Adam delved and Eve spun, who then was the gentleman, goes really hard.
It does. It does. Yeah, and all of these people were denigrated as sort of rabble-rousers and riffraff by the chroniclers of their time. So, it's interesting to see how that doesn't always align with the truth.
Yeah. So what happens in 1381, King meets the rebels in a boat, and he's like, well, hey, he makes a show of negotiating, and then essentially sends in the cavalry, literally speaking.
Yep.
And there is a massive massacre on the outskirts of London, and Wat Tyler and John Ball are both captured and then eventually executed, and a lot of peasants are killed. But no English ruler institutes a poll tax after that for almost exactly 600 years.
Wahey!
Wahey, indeed. Until... Do you know who it was who broke the streak?
Margaret Thatcher.
It was Maggie Thatcher.
Fucking hell! We should have fucking stormed Westminster.
I mean, they basically did.
Yeah, true, actually. Yeah, well, yeah, look how well her legacy has survived. Oh, fabulous. So there you go. Yeah, what you see, I think, in this one as well as a few other ones is also that there's like one guy or a couple guys who are at the center of this. And this is something you hear about over and over again in the historiography of these. It may not always necessarily be completely true. These guys' stories may be embellished, but you often hear about one charismatic guy who is at the center of this. And in the case of this one, it's this guy, Wat Tyler, and actually he dies before the end of the rebellion. I believe he's captured and killed, and that's sort of the beginning of the end. So it's not to say that if Wat Tyler hadn't died, he would have been able to sustain himself indefinitely, or the rebellion would have been able to sustain itself indefinitely, but you very much see this sort of populism standing in for more conventional styles of rulership and organization in a lot of these rebellions.
I'm just picturing like a Braveheart-style movie where Wat Tyler escapes, and then for an hour we have him just like riding into people's dreams and draining them with a ball and chain.
Having sex with Richard II's wife.
Good movie.
Oh boy.
I cannot... Okay, we can't go back to Braveheart.
No.
I just need to say this one thing. It is incredible that not only can you cut an hour off of this movie and change basically nothing about it, it's one contiguous hour.
Oh my god. It's just, did you hear about the nobleman William Wallace? He kills people because he misses his wife. He rips them limb from limb.
This is so sexy to me.
Oh my god, my cravat is so wet.
This is definitely like, that movie anticipates the concept of dark romantasy.
Oh my god, you're right.
I'm not saying that movie's good, but that scene definitely
No, that's what makes it evil.
Yeah. It does correctly identify a type of person.
Oh my god, I just want an evil man to chop off another man's willy with his sword and
do it for me.
And do it for me. I am scared. He smells disgusting. I am scared of him. This is very, very exciting.
This is erotic.
Never in danger, quail and our fathers, free and undaunted.
There's a couple of other sort of revolts that are major that people get mad if we don't mention. Just going to quickly rattle through them. Flemish revolts. Flanders sort of declares itself independent. They're led, of course, by a brewer. And so a bunch of Flemish towns to sort of make themselves de facto independent, and then they lose again. German Peasants' War. A bunch of peasants rise up in Germany, and this will later be recontextualized by German nationalists in a normal way. But the one that I want to talk about, because it's the funniest one, and this is ostensibly a comedy podcast, is the Cornish Revolt of 1497, or should I say Cornish Revolts.
Ooh.
So this all starts in... Okay, before we get into the nitty-gritty, we've got to establish two things about the Cornish. Number one... Actually, let me put this to you, Olivia. What is distinctive about the Cornish?
The different language.
The different
geographical isolation.
They speak a different language. They speak a language that's very closely related to Welsh because the English never bothered to get there. And And they also love mining.
Oh, true, tin. They've
Tin
got all
mine.
the tin.
They got all the tin in Britain, basically.
Yes.
And so the mining industry has been incredibly important to Cornwall since basically forever.
Cornwall is tin pot.
Yes. And they had a wonderful institution called the Stannery Parliament, which essentially means the mine parliament. You never heard that before.
That's what you call it when a bunch of K-pop girls decide to eject someone from K-pop Twitter. The Stannery Parliament.
So
We need to stop calling them fan clubs and start calling them
Stannery Parliaments. Yes. That's what our Discord is.
Yes! Wait, I'm trying to adjust that a bit. Oh yeah, we should create a Stannery. We should rename it to Stannery Parliament.
No, that's too confusing.
You're right.
So Cornwall has been minding its own business as a duchy within the Kingdom of England for hundreds of years until 1497. So the whole story starts in 1495 when a man claiming to be the dispossessed Prince Richard of England washes up in the court of King James IV of Scotland. Now, who is Prince Richard?
He's one of them little boys they put in the tower.
And then they mysteriously disappeared because, in the words of Joe Mason, sometimes princes just do that. So this mysterious Prince Richard is now believed to be a Flemish cloth merchant by the name of Perkin Warbeck.
Yeah, what can I say? I'm Prince Richard.
That is the worst Belgian accent I've ever heard.
What can I say? I'm Prince Richard.
Me, a Belgian cloth merchant? Me.
I'm about to go on an elegant walk through the country where my dispossession has taken play.
They can play. So James the Fourth immediately.
Wait. Can I please speak to King James?
James. So James immediately clocks two things. Number one, well, he probably clocks three things. Number one, this is funny, objectively. Number two, this guy is probably not the Prince in the Tower. I am picturing Perkin Warbeck showing up in incredibly small, princess clothes, he's massively outgrown, little trousers.
My mother made these for me. I just can't bear to let them go. Also, I don't have any more money.
They show that I am a prince.
Yeah, if these clothes offend your delicate Scottish sensibilities, you could give me some money to buy some more.
The other, so he clocks that this
The
guy's...
fact that my dick is hanging out bothers you. You should buy me a new pair of trousers. Yeah?
So, James immediately clocks this is also useful leverage. Because...
How?
No, this is the classic medieval king thing.
Oh, leverage against the English.
Yes.
But the English presumably, I mean, we don't know. The English presumably killed those kids.
We're gonna get to that.
Okay.
So the fact that he's like, okay, this was the classic thing that you did as a medieval king, though. It's like a guy would wash up from a rival country who you didn't like very much, and network, and be like, well, I could just unleash this guy at any time.
Yes.
To cause a civil war, so I can just keep him around as my pet English prince. And so he does entertain Perkin for a couple of years in his court. But he does get Perkin to marry a minor noblewoman, which suggests that he never really took the claim very seriously, because he didn't really put a lot of effort into cultivating this relationship.
Yeah.
We do, sidebar, have a wonderful love letter that he wrote ostensibly to this woman. I want Olivia to read this in your bad Flemish accent.
I shall perhaps be the happiest of all your admirers, and the happiest man on earth, since I have reason...
It would be Ert.
Since I have reason to hope you will think me worthy of your love. If I represent to my mind all your perfections, I am not only compelled to love, to adore, and to worship you, but love makes me your slave. Whether I was waking or sleeping... I cannot find rest or happiness except in your affection. All my hopes rest in you, and in you alone.
That what I loved about your intonation there is that is exactly how Belgians express love to each other.
I am in love with you. I think we should get married. Otherwise, I will kill myself.
So, in 1496, James makes a half-hearted attempt to invade England. We are getting back to Cornwall, by the way. In 1496, James makes a half-hearted attempt to invade England, and he basically makes it 4 miles into Northumberland, where he basically decides, this was a good bit, but I've overcommitted, I'm going home. And he puts Perkin on a boat hysterically called the Cuckoo. In one of the most amazing pieces of, like, symmetry, because he's a cuckoo.
Yeah, he's the little baby that should not be in that nest.
It's incredible.
That's really good.
And he sends him to Ireland, where he just generally kind of, like, inconveniences the nobility of Ireland and tries to raise a rebellion.
Amazing.
In response to these tensions, King Henry VII levies new taxes on the subjects of England, including various forced loans. And this had particularly bad consequences in Cornwall, because in more or less the same year, Henry had, like, essentially ordered all tin mines to cease production because of a regulatory dispute. He basically decided he didn't like the Stannery Parliament anymore.
No!
Hang on, I can get there. I can get to a joke about Stan culture. He disagreed about whether or not his fave was washed. And so this caused enormous discontent in Cornwall, because again, they're like, well, our entire industry is closed down, and now you've closed the mines, and now you're instituting a poll tax. Oh no!
Wow. Okay, ye oldie Thatcher. Closing the mines and instituting a poll tax.
He's gonna come for our milk.
No! We need the milkery parliament.
Only 17% of this audience is based in the UK. These references don't mean anything. She took the milk. Look it up. Anyway, so in response, Michael Ann Goff, who was a blacksmith, and Thomas Flamanck, who was a lawyer and former MP, began to organize a protest. And Flamanck, who was the sort of the articulate one, obviously, because he was a lawyer, went around basically across Cornwall arguing that it was basically, this is not our problem. We are like hundreds and hundreds of miles away from the Scottish border. In fact, we are as far away from Scotland as it is possible to be at any time in England ever. So why should we be taxed to pay for the defense? This is the job of the barons of the north. And he also said, and also the tax is legal. So he suggests that the Cornishmen should march to London and present a petition to the king, setting forth their grievances, and once again, identifying various advisors who were at fault for, of course, misleading the king, who, of course, was in the right and just didn't know it.
Nice.
So the Cornishmen start marching east through Devon and Somerset, and they are joined by more and more men until they are about 9,000 strong. They arrive at Blackheath in Greenwich, on the outskirts of London, the same place that the 1381 revolt had sort of congregated. And they are attacked at Deptford Strand by a royal army. In true Cornish fashion, they fight bravely, but get wiped, essentially, because it's 1497 and they have artillery now.
I want to fucking get shot with a cannon in fucking Deptford.
That can be arranged.
Thank you.
And Flamanck and Goff are both captured and executed. But once again, it's not a complete failure, because Henry does reopen the tin mines, and the Stannery Parliament is basically reinstated. Okay, bit of an anticlimactic ending to that story, right? Except that's not the end of the story, because a few months later...
No! Not him!
He's back. The guy who caused all of this in the first place, Perkin Warbeck.
Oh my, cut your losses, Perkin!
He's such a scumbag. So he lands at Land's End.
His name is Perkin Warbeck. Fuck off.
And he lands in Land's End in Cornwall, and basically reckons, well, okay, this is going to be my base for my attack on Henry, because all these people are mad anyway. So he manages to raise a force of 600 men, and he does manage to attack Exeter, and they do manage to, defeat Exeter, which is I think at that point it's the biggest town in the West Country.
It was probably still the biggest town in the West Country.
Bristol.
Oh, true.
Um,
Bristol's like, it's its own thing.
yeah.
Bristol's for the streets.
The David S. Pumpkins of Southwest England.
Exactly.
It's its own thing.
And Westbury-on-Trim is part of it. And the steam train is part of it.
But yeah, Bristol's not important because they haven't invented slavery yet. Just kidding, they definitely have.
I love David S. Pumpkins.
So good.
Sorry, carry on.
So, he raises a force of 6,000 men, but as soon as he hears that the royal army is marching to Cornwall to come and fuck his shit up, he immediately panics and runs away, and leaves his forces to either disperse or get slaughtered.
No.
He gets captured like 2 days later.
No.
So it wasn't even a successful fleeing, and he gets imprisoned.
I don't think that was Perkin Warbeck. I think that was an imposter.
That was actually the real...
That was actually the real prince.
And he gets imprisoned and executed, as you do. So what did we learn from any of that?
Not to do it again.
Although God knows what we did. I mean, yeah, it's classic. It's the classic script of a peasant's revolt with a nice kind of like regionalist, nationalist tint, and also a nice little sprinkling of Pretender King in there. I love a bit of a Pretender King.
Yeah.
Living in depth of land whose corns to yield, never in danger, quaileth our fathers, free and undaunted.
So yeah, these rebellions, as we've said, often did not work out very well. In fact, they usually did not. But usually we got, even if most of the people involved with leading them got killed, we got some pretty cool folk heroes / legends off of these stories. In fact, these might include a few names that you yourself might even recognize,
Like that guy who threw an apple at his son's head or whatever.
like Arnold Winkelried. Everyone knows Arnold Winkelried. You've heard of Arnold Winkelried, right?
Come on!
He allowed the Old Swiss Confederacy to win the Battle of Sempach over the army of the Habsburgs, right?
Of course, everybody knows him.
He's so iconic. Okay, well, if you haven't heard of him, you might have heard of a similar legend about a guy named Wilhelm.
Or
Wilhelm Tell. William Tell, that's right.
the guy from that song.
You know, the guy from the song that everyone knows that they play, that you have to play in, like, your middle school. Yeah, and they wrote that song about him, because that was his favorite song back in the day. So, William Tell is a Swiss folk hero / legend. In classic Swiss fashion, sort of appears around the Swiss origin story of, like, not being obligated to a specific, like, overarching ruling power. Yeah, a real warrior for Swiss neutrality. Which is so cool. I mean, everyone knows the story about him having to shoot an apple off of, like, a kid's head, but the full story, essentially, which we first have attested around 1470, concerns itself with a Swiss bailiff named Albrecht Gessler, who is super evil. Okay, this guy sucks. He sucks so much he buys a hat, and he sucks so much he buys a hat.
Boo!
And that's not it. That's not all.
It gets worse?
It gets worse. He puts the hat on a stick, and he's like, everyone has to tell me how cool this is and bow down to my hat. And everyone does, because they're bitches. Except the local hard man, William Tell, who is also a great archer. He's like, nah, bruv. Not gonna do that. It's just a hat. So Gessler puts William Tell through a trial. He's pissed off. Gessler is pissed off. He's like, That's not odd. I don't appreciate this disrespect. But I heard you're really good with your bow. So I would maybe think about letting you live if you shoot an apple off of your young son's head at something like, what is it, like 100 paces or something. Otherwise, William Tell will be executed. So William Tell, as we all know, miraculously makes the shot in what becomes quite a sort of iconic pop cultural moment for 500 plus years to come. All is well, but Gessler notices William Tell had actually pulled out 2 bolts from his quiver and asks what the second one was for. After some pressing, William Tell admits that if he had missed his first shot, the second bolts would have been aimed directly for Gessler's heart.
That goes hard.
It goes crazy hard. This pisses Gessler off, so he tries to throw Tell in prison on the other side of Lake Lucerne, but there's a storm, and by being the hardest geezer around, Tell is able to sail the ship back to the shore. He's the only one that can do it. And then he goes and he does shoot Gessler and kill him. And kickstarts the burgeoning Swiss Confederacy. We won't even get into what that is. It's basically just like a sort of proto trade confederation, nation state type situation.
It's a bunch of Germans in the mountains deciding they don't want to participate in society as it existed. And they're going to do something else.
They want the economic benefits of participating in society and little else, basically.
Oh, so more or less the Swiss attitude to the EU.
Yes. And so this kickstarts the burgeoning Swiss Confederacy's rebellion against the Imperial Habsburg rule. I should also say this ballad is mostly about the inception, development, and how fucking cool the Swiss Confederacy is. And the William Tell part is a bit of a footnote, but it is our earliest record of him.
It's the interesting part of the story.
Yeah, no, definitely.
You're like, damn, what if he is going to shoot his son in the face?
Yeah, and so we have quite a sort of iconic moment in the form of William Tell, and we also have, you know, sort of a clear moral coming through where William Tell is being made to worship/obey something that is not even power, it is sort of...
It is a hat.
It is a hat on a stick, and I think that's quite like a funny fuck you to the authorities, you know, is saying this is what you are, you're a hat on a stick.
What is a crown if not a hat on a stick?
Well, exactly, yeah.
And the stick is a horrifically inbred Habsburg.
Yeah, basically. I also wanted to talk a bit about Robin Hood, because he is attested, actually quite early on, he's attested, I think the first evidence we have of him in English is in the 1370s. There's a proverb that's in like a theological dialogue, which is, "Many men speak of Robin Hood and never shot his bow." Basically saying lots of people are all talk and no action.
That actually also goes hard.
It does go crazy
That's
hard.
a good line.
Yeah, so his actual story is first attested in the 15th century, but it probably was, you know, told as a legend much earlier than that. Those are just when you have printed or written versions. And there are quite a few different versions, but actually all of them are very specific that Robin Hood is a yeoman. So he, unlike recent versions, such as Robin Hood Men in Tights, in which he is a dispossessed nobleman, and that's what instigates his sort of plot arc, Robin Hood is a yeoman. He's someone who is maybe a small landowner. He cultivates his own land.
I put my hand up because there's a biographical piece of information that I don't know if you know this about Robin Hood. You know where he's from?
Loxley.
Which is where?
Yorkshire.
Sheffield.
Yo, it's an actual Sheffield.
It's an actual Sheffield.
I knew he was from Yorkshire, but I didn't know he was in Sheffield. Oh, fuck.
It's a suburb of Sheffield.
Oh,
yeah.
we have to go to Sheffield.
Yes.
Oh, nice.
He would have been an Owls fan.
Oh my god. Oh yeah, because he was the underdog. Yeah. So yes, again, someone without much political clout. Someone. What?
I thought you were saying that he had no political clout because he was from Sheffield.
Yes. He worked down to mines. Where is William Tell in sort of classic German fashion, basically abides by the rules and only is responding to, sort of actual injustice. Robin Hood, from the get-go, is quite recognizable as a cheeky fellow who likes to push it a little bit. Likes
a real Joe Mason
likes
type.
a bit of banter. I mean, I think it's sweet, actually, because the first ever Robin Hood story is actually, it's been described as more of a thriller than a comedy. I think quite quickly it becomes very comedic, although it often walks the line, but actually the first recorded Robin Hood story, he is an outlaw who's, like, hiding out in the woods with Little John, but he really wants to go to Mass. And that's how he gets caught. One of his things is that he loves the Virgin Mary. He's extremely devoted to the Virgin Mary, and he wants to go to Mass really badly to say the hours of the the Virgin Mass or whatever it is. So yeah, quite sweet. And that's sort of the instigating incident for, how he winds up in all sorts of trouble. Again, quite quickly, this sort of grows and develops, but actually, I think he's extremely recognizable from the get-go, because he's always an outlaw at the start of the story. He's a guy who is already living, on the lam, but he's always a guy who robs from the rich and gives to the poor. He always has beef with the sheriff, and he always hangs out with a ragtag group of his merry men. Little John is there from the beginning. Little John is as old and as attested as Robin Hood himself. Them having a fight on a bridge with sticks is also basically always there from the get-go, and that's how they become mates. And all of these other characters, so there's, like, the impoverished knight, who's a knight who rocks up and is like, I'll give you everything I have for a nice meal, and they feed him, and the knight is like, oh, I've only got 10 shillings, I'm actually a really poor knight. And Robin Hood is like, if that's true, fair enough, but if it's not, I'll kill you. So they go through all of his stuff, and they're like, by God, he really was broke. And then they all become mates. And a friendly friar. The friendly friar is often set against the kind of, like, evil monk, because, a friar is like a mendicant preacher. He's a guy who doesn't have that much, who lives on, the road, whereas, like...
Lives among the people.
Yeah, lives among the people, whereas the monk is often the guy who rats Robin Hood out. And so it is, like, it's so cool, actually, from basically the earliest time that we have these stories. He is this, like, extremely lovable scamp. He's, like, not that smart. He gets captured all the time. Little John is the smart one. He's, like, constantly bailing Robin Hood out. But Robin Hood is, even though he's a criminal, he beefs with the sheriff. He is always loyal to the king. So he's not a guy who is trying to change, the regime or kill the king or anything. He's mates with the king. It's just all the other guys he doesn't like.
Well, look at the furry Robin Hood movie.
Yeah, the king...
You have the absent King Richard the Lionheart, or as he would be called in that universe, King Richard the Heart. Because he's a lion.
It's true.
And he's up against, Richard the Lionheart's sort of fail brother.
Yeah.
And a snake.
Exactly. Even though what's really endearing about all of these stories as well is that even though Robin Hood does a lot of dumb shit, which is quite endearing, in the end, usually, although Robin Hood often dies at the end of these stories, it's generally because he's been ratted out or betrayed by someone. So this is absolutely not a kind of Reynard the Fox trickster story where he gets too big for his britches, and that's sort of his ironic downfall. He is, like, objectively treated by the narrative as a good guy, and it's not a moralizing story about the dangers of living outside the law. It's a story about don't rat out your mates, which is so cool. And there's been a lot of, discussion about who was the real original Robin Hood. Was he an actual guy? Because it's basically agreed that he doesn't come from mythology. He did actually, like, generate as a guy, as a story in England. This is not, like, drawing on earlier pagan traditions. And the problem is there's loads of people who were recorded as being called Robin Hood in, like, court records, especially criminals. Because hood could just be an epithet for someone who wore a hood. So his name is basically like Bobby who wears a hat. And I think that's really interesting as well, because he's an everyman. If you walked into any medieval town and asked for Robin Hood, the scumbag, they would have been like, oh yeah, that's Robert over there. He's always wearing his hood and he's a bit of a scumbag. And so it is, I think, in a weird way, does come across to me as a story about solidarity and about these, like, you know, impoverished and disenfranchised classes sticking together. I mean, in the story of the impoverished knight, Robin Hood asks the knight, like, oh, don't you have any friends? And the knight says, well, when I had money, I had friends, but then I lost my money and I lost my friends. And that's so interesting.
Isn't it interesting how people have always been the exact same?
Yeah.
Forever?
Yeah. And I think even though, like, as we've said before, you shouldn't necessarily look for the ideological roots of modern radical movements in the peasant revolts of the Middle Ages, I think that you can absolutely see that people were thinking critically about class and wealth and about how that positioned themselves in relation to their fellow man, and how, you know, lack of means and lack of money gave people common interests and very explicitly positioned them against those who were exploiting them and those who were living off of their hard work. And
also I think the idea that, and I think it really comes through in the anecdote about the hat on a stick from William Tell, but like the fact that people were thinking critically about where does political legitimacy come from and treating it as conditional.
Yes.
That ultimately this is a hat on a stick. If you're not being governed well, you know, even Thomas Aquinas is saying, well, if you're not being governed well, you probably can get away with this.
We'll kick the stick over. We'll knock the hat off.
With an arrow. Synthesis.
Yes. Woo!
Before we wrap up, I do want to talk about, we've been talking a lot about, like, how basically all of these end with, at very best, a concession and a massacre. And you might be wondering, well, were there any examples of the peasants kind of, like, winning, in a sense, and kind of going their own way? And there are a few, and I want to talk about one, because I think it's fun, which is the Republic of Dithmarschen.
Yes.
The Republic of Ditchmarsh, or Ditchmarsh, as it literally seems to translate to. So Dithmarschen is a region in modern-day Schleswig-Holstein, in northern Germany.
You mean Schleswig-Holstein?
I can't even say it. Schleswig.
Yeah.
Modern-day Schleswig-Holstein, at the mouth of the river Elbe, which is the river that feeds into Hamburg.
Yeah.
And it's a region that it is flat and marshy, and it is basically only inhabitable because of a massive network of dikes and earthworks that have been built up over centuries. And the people who lived in that region, they were always very, very clannish, and always very, very fiercely independent. And also, they were mostly left alone for most of history because it's a big, salty marsh. Nobody really wants it. But at the start of the 13th century, Dithmarschen was under the overlordship of King Valdemar of Denmark. And Valdemar gets a bit too big for his britches in 1226 and tries to invade the Holy Roman Empire, basically to like take over a swathe of northern Germany. And he's defeated at the Battle of Bornholm and loses control of his southern lands. And basically that interminable border between Germany and Denmark gets pushed further back up again, even though it's all the same. I didn't say that. And the Dithmarschers seize the opportunity to declare their de facto independence from both the Holy Roman Empire and Denmark, because they reach an agreement with the Bishop of Hamburg, which is basically they will pay the Bishop of Hamburg every time he gets elected, and then in exchange they will be left the F alone, ideally forever. And so all of these peasants, who again have been living in a big swamp, basically, are suddenly faced with the fact that they are now independent and they have to run things themselves. And so it takes them about 220 years to come up with a constitution, which I think is brilliant.
Nice.
It contains 257 articles.
I love Germany.
Governing basically every aspect of local life and commerce. Der basic law.
Der basic law. This is a basic law. We will work on expanding it. This is just the Grundgesetz. Just you wait until we come out with the Luftgesetz.
The Dettenbreken. And eventually they come up with a system where they have 48 regents who are sort of basically work as a little parliament. And each represents one of these like local clans of bog people. And according to William Urban, who wrote maybe the only sort of English language book about the Republic ever, basically the way that it worked was you could petition the regents would meet, and if they thought that your issue was relevant sort of to the people, they would send people out to the markets to announce, "Men of our country, there is something said concerning our land." And then they would everybody would gather around and they would have a big debate in the town square. And everybody gets a chance to everyone present gets a chance to express their opinion.
Oh, God!
And once they've done that, everybody divides up into 3 bodies for voting. And if 2 of the 3 divisions votes for a proposition, it was binding on everybody across the entire republic. In true German fashion, they come up with, bicameralism is not enough. We need tricameralism. More legislative bodies.
Yes.
So, obviously, various nobles think that this is all patently ridiculous and that the peasants need to be taught a lesson. So, various nobles try and invade for the next 400 years, but they get repulsed by the very well-organized civil militia, who win mostly because they're very happy to just, like, knock over the dikes and just flood everything and just fight in a bog. And it's only in 1556, so over 300 years later, when the Republic of Dithmarschen is finally sort of subjugated. And this is very, very unusual because there are other peasant republics that sort of pop up at various points in the Middle Ages. Quite a few of them are in Switzerland, actually, and become part of the Swiss Confederation. But most of them are not very long-lived because, quite frankly, none of their neighbors like having a ideologically confronting... I mean, it's a combination of A, I want the taxes from that land, and B, sort of 1960s domino theory. Of like, well, if these peasants do it, and it works, then that's bad for us, the nobles. And so everybody else who tries this gets invaded, and, and put to the sword. But Dithmarschen sticks around for 300 years because it's a fucking salty marsh. There's not that much you can do with it. And these guys have basically demonstrated they are ungovernable anyway.
It's in the genetics, isn't it? It's just inescapable.
I really love that anecdote that you read in the Fonts episode, or that you introduced in the Fonts episode about the German national hero who starts his speech by announcing, "Now first I must apologize because we Germans are very rude."
Yeah! Arminius! Oh, it's so fucking funny. We do not bullshit around. Once we've fulfilled all of the bureaucratic obligations and filled out the relevant forms, we will get right to the point after a mandatory break.
And they love living like this. They're so happy.
The struggle is the point. Last time we had a lot of fun. Several million people were killed.
What's that amazing Subway Takes video where he's like, "What's the best part of living in Berlin? The hardships we experience."
Yes.
What can we learn from all this about our overview of peasant revolts? I think the first thing that we can learn is that basically these are not rebellions that are seeking to overthrow a system. This is not a revolutionary this is not a revolutionary movement. At most it's a reformist movement, and often not even that. It's a put this back movement.
Yep.
And One of the reasons why the peasant revolts are such a trouble for Marxists is because they are so conflicted about them. Because a lot of Marxists in the 20th and 19th century viewed the peasantry in the countries where such a thing still existed as a basically reactionary class. People who were quite happy with the way things were as long as you didn't touch the money, basically.
Yeah.
And we're not a sort of self-conscious class that could be receptive to revolutionary socialism. Because again, like, if you live on a farm and you see a taxman, once a year, your problems are not caused by the government. Your much more immediate concerns are, oh my god, am I going to grow enough barley this year?
Am I going to grow enough potatoes to make it through the winter?
Yeah.
Yeah, and even then we see, like, a clear dichotomy in participation in these movements, in that people who were serfs, who were tied to the land, were much less likely to participate.
Well, it's classic, keep them hungry, they can't revolt.
Exactly. It was the well-fed guy who was going to have to give up his second cart. That's the guy who was really willing to kick off.
Yeah.
I mean, like, even now, the people who are the most impoverished in society are still, like, among the least likely to vote and participate in civil society and democracy in other ways. And we see that very much in the Middle Ages as well.
Mm-hmm. And it is telling that, with the exception of people like John Ball, where there is a kind of, like, there's not a sort of ideological challenge to monarchy, to, what we might call feudalism, and to the structure of medieval society. And I think that part of the reason for that is just, in order to have a revolutionary movement, you needed a separate force to come in and disrupt all of the ways of life that people had been relying on for centuries. Who were the people who were the most receptive to in Europe, to radical socialism, in a lot of the Middle East, to sort of radical Islamism in the 20th century? It was the dispossessed rural people who came to the city and found that all of the certainties of rural life had already been dissolved.
Yes.
And so, of course, you would be like, well, now we need to look forward and build something. Whereas if you are a peasant, I'm not saying your life is easy, but you have a framework to understand the world around you, and you also have a network of people in your immediate community who can support you if things go sideways.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this, I think, even in, like, the, How to Solve a Murder episode about the legal structures.
Yes.
And how deeply, like, these social networks were entrenched to the point where, like, legal processes were not so much, like, a function of social networks as they were just, like, an expression of them. Like, everything and everyone was so deeply tied together, and it makes a lot of sense that those people would be and those networks would be extremely resistant to change.
Another thing I think about the fact that so many of these revolts are about presenting petitions to the king, as opposed to, like, saying, let's do away with all this bullshit, the Monty Python-esque, strange women in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a form of government.
Yeah.
The reason why that isn't front and center is because people fundamentally believed in the reciprocal relationship between lord and tenant. That there was a contract that was being broken by these taxes, by closing the tin mines, by whatever it was that was agitating people.
And they believe that, and I think we see in the characters like Robin Hood and William Tell are very much an expression of the fact that, the king is this distant figure, the monarchy is this distant structure that does not have oversight over these minutiae of people's lives. And in fact, it may well be that if, these people are abusing their power, it is righteous and rightful for the people, those who are actually affected by it. And, we see this as well in Martin Luther saying, well, fighting is okay if you're fighting back.
Mm-hmm.
To do just that, to take up arms and fight back and restore the proper natural order.
And the proper natural order does not necessarily mean that you are equal to your rulers.
No, you didn't. I mean, and I think, again, like, you didn't have to be if you were a yeoman. you probably felt like in some ways you had it pretty good. I mean, I think you obviously still can't overstate how much your life sucked in terms of health, convenience, and, you know, sort of predictability and work compared to today. But I think if you were someone with like a bit of land or a successful business and you felt like sort of quite comfortable, then I think you would have been especially reactive to threats to that.
Yeah. And it is telling that I think the places where you see the most kind of like radical, you know, truly anti-establishment revolts, like the revolt of the Ciompi in Florence, like the Zealots of Thessaloniki, who we will talk about one day. They are amazing. You see that in the big cities are the places where like truly revolutionary ideology spreads.
Yep.
Because people have got nothing to lose.
Yep.
Well, that's just about going to do us for another episode of the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. And if you liked this podcast and you want to see more of it, then don't forget to rate it, to leave a review, and to tell a friend. And if you leave a Spotify comment, Olivia might read one out on the show.
Thank you to Wump, who said on our Reviewing Medieval Movies episode, "Jump scared by the mention of furry Robin Hood. You should still talk about it. I have no biases here. The Fox Lady and the Large Bear Man, ...
I hadn't even considered the Large Bear Man.
Yeah, no.
But of course the Large Bear Man.
Of course.
I'm an idiot.
Thank you also to Grapefruit Street on the same episode, who said, "I was wearing my Disney Robin Hood t-shirt while listening to this." I've got Robin Hood on the brain, I think, this month. I think we better do...
Should we just do Robin Hood next?
Maybe we should. Yeah.
You'll find out in 2 weeks whether or not we did do Robin Hood next.
Maybe we should do reviewing animated movies.
Ooh. Oh, and lastly, we've already addressed this, but thank you to everybody who came out to the first Weird Medieval Guys events, the pub quizzes in London. It was amazing.
You guys are so cool. You're all the coolest. I'm sorry to anyone who didn't get a ticket because they sold out very quickly. But
we were not prepared for this.
We'll do more events soon.
We were really not prepared for the demand. Well, until next time, take it easy.
Bye-bye.